How is compliance enforced? In this lesson, you will learn how compliance is enforced and by whom. It will take you up to 10 minutes to get through this lesson. At the end of the lesson, you will understand 1. The importance of compliance. 2. Who enforces compliance. 3. How compliance is enforced. And 4. What penalties can be placed on individuals and companies if there is a breach. This will give you the confidence in knowing how compliance is enforced and have the necessary resource to obtain more information. Importance of compliance. Complying with essential safety measure legislation is important primarily to ensure the safety of building occupants, adjoining buildings, and passers-by. However, compliance also mitigates the risk of legal action against building owners and other parties. Who enforces compliance? The authority having jurisdiction, as per state legislation, are responsible for enforcing compliance. This typically is, but not limited to, the fire brigade and council building enforcement officers.
So one of the roles that the firefighters have at the local fire station is they go out and learn their area. And part of that is to visit places where they believe to be important or high risk, such as hospitals, factories, and nursing homes and aged care centres. So when they turn up to undertake this familiarisation process, it's just to get to know so they understand the area, they understand the building and what sort of risks they may have to deal with in case they do get an emergency call here. They also understand they have to learn what the fire safety systems they have in those buildings. And one of the things they do is they do walk around and check to see where they are for their own information, as well as to make sure it's been maintained properly. One of the most important issues about fire safety equipment, it's fine to have it installed, and one should have it installed. But if it's not maintained properly in working order, then it won't work when it needs to. And that is one of the things they will do. They will walk around, make sure it's been maintained last time it was maintained, and that it is in working order.
How compliance is enforced. The fire brigade or council building enforcement officers are authorised to carry out an inspection of a building or place relating to an essential safety measure at any time on request after 24 hours notice as per the state legislation. Inspection will also occur following any major incident.
So the important reason, as I said before, about why we maintain fire safety equipment and why the fire brigade checks, there are really two reasons, and the most important one is that it works when it needs to. If there is a fire or an emergency, we have to make sure that it works. And the other reason is that it is required by legislation that fire safety equipment or emergency equipment is actually maintained in working order. So there are really two repercussions that could take place. One is that should a fire occur, or an emergency, because also it's not only fire that we have fire safety equipment. There are bomb threats, gas leaks, chemical leaks. So there are all sorts of other reasons why we should be maintaining equipment. So that, of course, if it doesn't work when required during an emergency, then that could put people's lives at risk and make it more difficult for the fire brigade and other emergency services to turn up and do their job. The other repercussion is a legal one, in the sense that you are required by legislation to maintain it. So if the fire brigade or any other authority comes along and finds out that it's not being maintained properly and in accordance with the legislation, then there's also fines and also legal action that could come against you as well.
Essential safety measure defects or missed testing frequencies identified during an inspection may be deemed a failure to comply and considered a breach of the regulations. Breaches may result in penalties being imposed of up to $10,000 for individuals and $50,000 for companies. The following are some examples of where Stokes Safety has experienced local enforcement of fire safety requirements.
We get called to buildings to inspect buildings after a fire and to make recommendations on whether that building is safe for reoccupation after the fire. A good example of this was a number of years ago. We were called to a building that some of us would know as Marland House in Burke Street in the city. That building was affected by a fire in the adjoining building. Smoke was extracted into Marland House by way of a smoke extraction system, and the whole multi-storey building went into general evacuation mode. which is not necessarily a problem. However, that building had the family law court and the titles office in it. So both of those sites were evacuated. After the fire, the council required us to inspect the building and to certify that building was safe to occupy after that building an exam, and therefore all the batteries in the systems, in the emergency lights and exit signs, the fire panel batteries had to be checked. The batteries and emergency lights, as I said, had to be replaced. There was a large number of other items which had to be tested to ensure that building was safe for occupation in the building on that Monday morning. The process for us to establish if the building is safe for reoccupation is to use the Australian Standard AS 1851 that I spoke of earlier and take each of the maintenance schedules in that Australian Standard and compare those maintenance schedules against each of the fire protection items that do exist in the building and make sure each of those fire protection items are tested to the standard prescribed in the AS 1851-12 code. The property owner, and by extension the property manager, who is the owner's representative, is quite onerous in that the building regulations put the onus on the property owner to ensure the building is maintained to the necessary standards prescribed in the building regulations. If the property owner is negligent in that area, there's a number of different areas that person could be prosecuted in, not only as a contravention under the building regulations and hence the Building Act, but also they could be found guilty under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and by extension they could be found guilty of manslaughter if a person was to die. If not all the documents are available after a fire, well, there's a number of issues we're talking about there. After a fire, and if no one is hurt, the first thing the insurance company will ask is, does that building comply with current building regulations or building regulations at the time of construction? Current building regulations, meaning the essential services legislation, and at the time of construction, does the building have all its necessary fire protection items in it? A few years ago, I had a number of dealings with a number of insurance companies where their brief was that building does not comply with the building regulations because it doesn't have its essential services maintenance to standard, and therefore we're not paying out on this, in this case, $20 million claim. And therefore the building will not be rebuilt with funds from the insurance company. The other part of it is, if the information is not available and the coroner's court was to summons that information, then the next question will be whether the information was provided and the documents weren't available. If the tests weren't provided at all, then the person will be charged with manslaughter. The owner will be charged with manslaughter, and it will then become progress to a criminal proceedings. We have been requested to provide copies of ESMs on a number of occasions. There was a fire in Moreland Road in Coburg, I think from memory, an aged care home where we were summoned to provide all our essential service items. At the time the building was sold, it was sold with a current essential services certificate in place. However, the new owner took the building over and still operated as an aged care home, didn't maintain all the fire protection items. 3 years later, there was a fire in the building. In the case of Moreland Aged Care Home, because the fire protection items in the building weren't correctly maintained, the insurance company refused to pay out on the reconstruction of the building.
Let's recap. Now you have learnt compliance is important to ensure the safety of building occupants, adjoining buildings and passers-by. 2. Compliance is enforced by inspections carried out by the authority having jurisdiction, typically the fire brigade or council building enforcement officers. And 3, breaches of the building regulations can result in penalties to either the individual or the company.